Margaret Harris had served the royal household for 37 years. She had seen 3 generations of royalty pass through the palace corridors, kept their secrets, and earned their trust. But on that cold October morning, when the newly crowned Queen Victoria Ashford lay in state, Margaret made a decision that would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. The ornate mahogany safe in the late Queen's private chambers contained more than jewels and personal letters. Inside were documents that could rewrite history, expose family secrets buried for decades, and potentially destroy the reputation of the crown itself. When Princess Elena, the Queen's daughter-in-law, approached Margaret with trembling hands and demanded access to the safe, the elderly guard looked her straight in the eye and spoke the words that would echo through the palace halls forever. "Not for you, Your Highness. Some secrets are meant to stay buried." What Margaret didn't know was that Princess Elena had already discovered a fragment of the truth, a truth so explosive that it would force her to choose between her loyalty to the crown and her duty to justice. In the days that followed the Queen's death, the palace would become a battlefield of secrets, where trust would be shattered, alliances would crumble, and the very survival of the monarchy would hang in the balance. This is the story of what really happened behind the palace walls when Queen Victoria Ashford died, and why one loyal servant's refusal to open a safe would set in motion events that no one could have predicted. The rain drummed against the tall windows of Ashford Palace as Margaret Harris walked the familiar corridors for what she feared might be the last time. Her black uniform, pressed to perfection despite the circumstances, bore the weight of 37 years of faithful service. The palace felt different now, emptier somehow, as if the very walls mourned the loss of Queen Victoria Ashford. Margaret's weathered hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her key ring. Each key represented a door, a room, a secret she had protected throughout her decades of service. But none were more important than the small silver key that hung closest to her heart, the key to Queen Victoria's private safe. The Queen had died 3 days ago, suddenly and unexpectedly in her sleep. The official cause was heart failure, but Margaret had noticed things in the weeks before her death. The Queen had been agitated, constantly looking over her shoulder, and spending long hours alone in her private study. She had also changed the combination to her safe twice in the past month, something she had never done in all the years Margaret had known her. The morning after the funeral, Princess Elena had cornered Margaret in the servants' corridor. Elena was beautiful in the way that photographs loved: sharp cheekbones, piercing blue eyes, and blonde hair that never seemed out of place. But Margaret had always sensed something cold beneath that perfect exterior, something calculating. "Margaret," Elena had said, her voice smooth as silk but with an edge of steel, "I need access to the Queen's private safe. There are family documents I must review before the coronation proceedings continue." Margaret had looked at the young woman who had married into the royal family 5 years earlier. Elena had never shown much interest in family history before, and her sudden urgency seemed suspicious. "I'm sorry, Your Highness, but the Queen left specific instructions about her personal effects. They are to remain sealed until the new monarch is officially crowned." Elena's perfect composure had cracked for just a moment, revealing something desperate underneath. "Margaret, you don't understand. There are matters of national importance in that safe. I have reason to believe there are documents that could affect the stability of the crown." "Then perhaps you should speak with King James about your concerns," Margaret had replied, referring to Elena's husband, who was set to be crowned within the week. But Elena had shaken her head vehemently. "James doesn't know about this yet. He can't know, not until I've had a chance to review everything. Please, Margaret, I'm trying to protect him, to protect all of us." Margaret had stood firm. "I'm sorry, Your Highness, but I cannot help you." That conversation had taken place 2 days ago, and since then, Elena had made 3 more attempts to gain access to the safe. Each time, she had become more insistent, more desperate. The last time, she had even brought Lord Chancellor William Blackwood with her, hoping his authority would sway Margaret's decision. Blackwood was a thin, sharp-faced man with gray hair and cold eyes. He had served as chief advisor to Queen Victoria for over a decade, and many said he was the real power behind the throne. When he and Elena had approached Margaret together, there had been something unsettling about their partnership. "Mrs. Harris," Blackwood had said, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "I must insist that you provide access to the Queen's private safe. There are matters of state that require immediate attention." But Margaret had seen through his carefully constructed facade. In all her years of service, she had learned to read people, and what she saw in Blackwood's eyes wasn't concern for the state, it was fear. "Lord Chancellor," she had replied respectfully, "I understand your position, but my loyalty was to Queen Victoria first and foremost. She entrusted me with the security of her personal effects, and I will honor that trust." Blackwood's jaw had tightened. "You're being unreasonable, Mrs. Harris. Your duty is to the crown, not to a dead woman's paranoia." The word paranoia had struck Margaret like a physical blow. Queen Victoria had not been paranoid. She had been careful, protective, and in her final weeks, genuinely frightened. Margaret had seen the Queen burning documents in her fireplace late at night, had noticed her checking locks multiple times, and had observed her growing distrust of even her closest advisors. Now, as Margaret made her evening rounds through the Queen's private quarters, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The rooms that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed filled with shadows and whispers. She paused outside the Queen's study, her hand hovering over the door handle. The study was where the safe was located, hidden behind a false panel in the wall behind Queen Victoria's desk. Margaret had been one of only 3 people who knew of its existence: the Queen herself, Margaret, and one other person. But that person had died years ago, taking the secret to the grave. Or so Margaret had thought. As she pushed open the study door, Margaret was startled to find someone already inside. A young woman with short brown hair and intelligent green eyes was sitting at the Queen's desk, carefully examining papers that had been left scattered across the surface. "Who are you?" Margaret demanded, her hand moving instinctively to the emergency alarm on her belt. The young woman looked up, seemingly unfazed by being caught. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, investigative journalist with the London Tribune, and you must be Margaret Harris." "How did you get in here? This area is strictly off-limits to the public." Sarah smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I have my sources. The same sources that told me Queen Victoria didn't die of natural causes." Margaret felt her blood run cold. "That's a very serious accusation, Miss Mitchell. I suggest you leave immediately before I call security." "I don't think you'll do that," Sarah said calmly, "because I think you know I'm right. I think you've known something was wrong for weeks, maybe months, and I think that's why you're refusing to let anyone into that safe." The journalist stood up, moving around the desk with careful, measured steps. "I've been investigating the royal family for 2 years, Margaret. May I call you Margaret? I've uncovered some very interesting connections between certain members of the royal household and some rather unsavory business dealings." "I don't know what you're talking about," Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Lord Chancellor Blackwood has been embezzling from the royal treasury for over 5 years, Sarah continued. "He's been using his position to funnel money to offshore accounts, and he's been covering his tracks by manipulating the royal financial records." Margaret's mind reeled. "That's impossible. Lord Blackwood has served the crown faithfully for years." "Has he?" Sarah asked. "Or has he been using his position to line his own pockets while slowly bankrupting the monarchy?" "I have bank records, Margaret. I have transaction histories that trace back to accounts in his name." The journalist reached into her bag and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "But that's not the worst of it. I believe Queen Victoria discovered his embezzlement. I believe she confronted him about it, and I believe he killed her to keep her quiet." Margaret sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "No, that's not possible. The Queen died of heart failure. The royal physician confirmed it." "The royal physician who has been on Blackwood's payroll for the past 3 years," Sarah said gently. "Margaret, I know this is difficult to hear, but I think Queen Victoria was murdered, and I think whatever evidence she had against Blackwood is in that safe you're protecting." The room fell silent except for the continued drumming of rain against the windows. Margaret's mind raced through the events of the past few weeks, seeing them now in a new and terrifying light. The Queen's agitation, her late-night document burning, her increased security measures around the safe, it all made sense now. "Why are you telling me this?" Margaret asked finally. "Because I need your help," Sarah admitted. "I can't prove any of this without access to that safe, and you're the only person who can open it." Even if what you're saying is true, I can't just hand over the Queen's private documents to a journalist. There are protocols that Blackwood controls. Sarah interrupted. Margaret, if I'm right about this, then Princess Elena is working with Blackwood. Think about it. Why else would she be so desperate to get into that safe? Why would she be working so closely with the Lord Chancellor? Margaret's heart sank as she realized the truth in Sarah's words. Elena's behavior had been strange, her urgency suspicious, and her partnership with Blackwood had seemed unnatural from the beginning. What do you want me to do? Margaret asked quietly. I want you to open the safe, Sarah said. Not for me, but for the Queen. For the truth she died protecting. Margaret looked around the study that had been Queen Victoria's sanctuary. The room was filled with memories. Late-night conversations about affairs of state. Quiet moments when the Queen had shared her fears and hopes for the future of the monarchy. Queen Victoria had been more than just a monarch to Margaret. She had been a friend, a confidant, and a woman who had trusted her with her deepest secrets. If I do this, Margaret said slowly, and we find evidence that the Queen was murdered, what then? Who can we trust? King James, Sarah said without hesitation. From everything I've learned, he's completely innocent in all of this. He genuinely loved his mother and would never have been party to her murder. But he's also naive and trusting, which is why Blackwood and Elena have been able to manipulate him so easily. Margaret stood up, her decision made. The safe is behind the panel in the wall. But, Miss Mitchell, if we open it and find nothing, if your suspicions prove wrong, I'll have you arrested for breaking into the palace. And if we find what I think we'll find, you'll help me get justice for Queen Victoria?
Margaret nodded grimly.
If the Queen was murdered, then whoever did it will pay. I swear it on my 37 years of loyal service. Together, the unlikely allies moved toward the hidden panel. Margaret's hands shook as she reached for the concealed latch, knowing that whatever they found behind that wall would change everything forever. The rain continued to drum against the windows, as if the very heavens were weeping for the truth that was about to be revealed. As the panel swung open to reveal the gleaming steel safe beyond, Margaret whispered a prayer to the woman she had served so faithfully. Forgive me, Your Majesty, if I'm making the wrong choice, but I cannot let your murderers win. The combination came to her fingers as naturally as breathing. The date of Queen Victoria's coronation, a number that had meant everything to the woman who had dedicated her life to serving her people. As the safe clicked open, both women held their breath, knowing that the contents would either vindicate Margaret's faith in her beloved queen or destroy everything she had believed about the woman she had served. Inside the safe, neat stacks of documents waited in the darkness, along with several items wrapped in silk cloth. Margaret reached for the topmost document with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning the first few lines before her face went pale. Dear God, she whispered. Sarah, you were right. The document in Margaret's trembling hands bore the official royal seal, but its contents were far from official. Written in Queen Victoria's distinctive handwriting, it was a detailed account of financial irregularities she had discovered in the royal treasury. But as Sarah read over Margaret's shoulder, it became clear that this was only the beginning of a conspiracy that reached far deeper than either of them had imagined. Look at this, Sarah whispered, pointing to a series of dates and figures. These transactions correspond exactly to what I found in my investigation. But Queen Victoria discovered patterns I never even suspected. The document revealed that Blackwood had not been working alone. He had established a network of corrupt officials throughout the royal household, each taking a percentage of the stolen funds in exchange for their silence and cooperation. The embezzlement scheme had been running for 8 years, not 5 as Sarah had originally believed. Margaret carefully set down the first document and reached for the next one. This one was different, a letter addressed to King James, written in the Queen's hand but never sent. My dearest James, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the truth I tried to protect you from has finally come to light. I pray that you will forgive me for not telling you sooner. But I wanted to gather irrefutable proof before making such serious accusations against people you trust. The letter went on to detail not just the financial crimes, but something far more sinister. Queen Victoria had discovered that Blackwood and Elena were not just stealing money. They were selling royal secrets to foreign governments, state secrets, military information, diplomatic communications. All of it had been commodified and sold to the highest bidders. Elena, the queen had written, is not the woman you believe her to be. Her marriage to you was not born of love, but of calculation. She has been reporting on our family's private affairs to hostile foreign powers since before your wedding. I have evidence that she has passed along sensitive information about our military capabilities, our diplomatic strategies, and even the personal weaknesses of our allies. Sarah felt her heart racing as she absorbed the implications. Margaret, if this is true, then Princess Elena is a spy, an enemy agent who has been operating at the very heart of the British monarchy for 5 years. Margaret's face had gone ashen. The Queen suspected this? How could she have kept it to herself? She was trying to protect King James, Sarah replied, understanding dawning in her voice. Look at this next part. The letter continued. I know this revelation will destroy you, my son. Elena has given you happiness, and I have watched you love her with the pure heart that has always been your greatest strength and your greatest vulnerability. But I could not allow her betrayal to continue. Nor could I permit Blackwood to continue his theft from the people we are sworn to serve. I have been gathering evidence for months, building a case that would be impossible to deny or dismiss. Margaret reached for another document, this one containing photocopies of bank statements, wire transfer records, and what appeared to be coded communications between Elena and an unknown recipient. The communications were dated as recently as 2 weeks before the Queen's death. She was still active. Sarah breathed. Even after all this time, Elena was still passing information to her handlers. The evidence was overwhelming. Elena had provided detailed information about troop movements, security protocols for visiting dignitaries, and even personal information about King James that could be used for blackmail or manipulation. The foreign payments to her hidden accounts totaled millions of pounds over the 5-year period. But it was the next document that made both women gasp in horror. It was a medical report hidden beneath the other papers that revealed the true cause of Queen Victoria's death. The report, apparently commissioned by the Queen herself from a private physician, showed elevated levels of a rare poison in her blood, a poison that would mimic the symptoms of heart failure. She knew, Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. She knew they were going to kill her. The medical report was accompanied by a note in the Queen's handwriting. I have been experiencing symptoms consistent with slow poisoning for the past 3 weeks. I suspect my tea is being tampered with during my morning meetings with Lord Blackwood. I have arranged for secret blood tests to confirm my suspicions. If my death is announced as natural causes, this report will serve as evidence of murder. Sarah's hands shook as she photographed each document with her phone. Margaret, we have to get this to King James immediately. His life could be in danger too. But how? Margaret asked desperately. If Blackwood and Elena are controlling access to the king, how do we reach him? They could claim we're lying, that we fabricated these documents. Before Sarah could answer, they heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Multiple sets of footsteps, approaching quickly and with purpose. Margaret quickly began gathering the documents, but Sarah grabbed her arm. Leave them, Sarah whispered urgently. If we're caught with these, they'll destroy them and claim we stole them. We need to hide the evidence and find another way to reach the king. The footsteps stopped just outside the study door. Margaret quickly closed the safe and replaced the wall panel, while Sarah scattered the papers that had been on the desk back to their original positions. They had barely managed to compose themselves when the door burst open. Lord Blackwood entered first, followed by 2 palace security guards and Princess Elena. Blackwood's usually composed demeanor showed cracks of anger and suspicion. Mrs. Harris, he said coldly, what are you doing in the Queen's study at this hour? My usual evening security rounds, Lord Chancellor, Margaret replied, proud that her voice remained steady. I was checking to ensure all the rooms were properly secured for the night. Blackwood's eyes narrowed as they fell on Sarah. And who is this? Before Margaret could answer, Elena stepped forward. That's the journalist who's been asking questions about the royal family. Sarah Mitchell from the London Tribune. How did you gain access to the palace? Blackwood demanded. Sarah stood straighter, drawing on years of investigative experience. I'm here on official business, researching a story about the Queen's legacy for our upcoming memorial edition. Without proper authorization, Blackwood noted. That constitutes trespassing on royal property. One of the security guards moved forward, but Margaret intervened. Lord Chancellor, if I may, Miss Mitchell was accompanied by proper credentials when I encountered her. Perhaps there was a miscommunication about her access permissions. It was a lie, but Margaret said it with such conviction that even Elena looked uncertain. Blackwood studied both women carefully, clearly sensing that something was amiss but unable to identify exactly what. Nevertheless, Blackwood said finally, Miss Mitchell will need to leave immediately. And Mrs. Harris, I want a full report on your security protocols. There have been too many irregularities since the Queen's death. As the group prepared to leave the study, Sarah caught Margaret's eye and mouthed silently, "Tomorrow." Margaret gave the slightest nod of acknowledgement, but their secret communication did not go unnoticed. Princess Elena, who had been watching both women carefully throughout the encounter, saw the exchange. Her beautiful features hardened into something cold and calculating. The next morning, Margaret arrived at the palace to find her security clearance had been revoked. She was informed by a junior administrator that her services were no longer required and that she should clear out her personal belongings immediately. On whose authority? Margaret demanded. Lord Chancellor Blackwood's, the administrator replied nervously. He said there were concerns about security breaches and that a full investigation was being conducted. Margaret's heart sank. They had moved faster than she had anticipated. Without her access to the palace, she would be unable to protect the evidence or reach King James. Worse still, she realized that Blackwood and Elena now suspected she knew something, which put her in considerable danger. As she cleaned out her small office, Margaret's mind raced. She needed to find a way to contact King James directly, but the coronation was still 3 days away, and until then, all access to him was controlled by the Lord Chancellor's office. That afternoon, Sarah called Margaret's personal phone with urgent news. They've accelerated the coronation, Sarah reported. It's been moved up to tomorrow. They're claiming it's out of respect for the late Queen's wishes, but I think they're trying to get James crowned before anyone can challenge their narrative. Once he's crowned, Blackwood will have even more control over him, Margaret realized. And Elena will be queen. We'll never be able to expose them then. There's something else, Sarah continued. I've been investigating Elena's background more thoroughly. Margaret, Princess Elena doesn't exist. What do you mean? I mean, the woman who married Prince James 5 years ago has a completely fabricated identity. Elena Ashford was born Elena Volkov in Russia. She was recruited by foreign intelligence services when she was 18 and trained specifically to infiltrate the British royal family. Her entire courtship of Prince James was a planned operation. Margaret felt the world spinning around her. The scope of the conspiracy was beyond anything she had imagined. How long have you known this? I just confirmed it this morning. But Margaret, there's more. I found records of 3 other women with similar backgrounds who have married into European royal families over the past decade. This isn't just about Britain, it's part of a larger operation to infiltrate and compromise monarchies across Europe. The implications were staggering. If Elena was part of an international conspiracy, then the threat to the British crown was just the beginning. Other royal families could be similarly compromised, and the stability of democratic governments across Europe could be at risk. We have to stop the coronation, Margaret said firmly. How? We have no official standing, no way to reach the king, and no one will believe us without proof. Then we'll have to get proof they can't ignore, Margaret replied. Tonight, after the palace is locked down for security preparations, I'm going back in. Margaret, that's suicide. If they catch you, they'll claim you're a terrorist trying to disrupt the coronation. Then you'll have to make sure they don't catch me, Margaret said. Can you create a distraction? Something that will draw security away from the Queen's quarters. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then her voice became determined. Yes, I can arrange for a fire alarm to go off in the East Wing. That should pull most of the security away from the central palace. Good. While you're doing that, I'll get back into the safe and retrieve the evidence. Then we'll find a way to get it directly to King James, even if we have to interrupt the coronation ceremony to do it. Margaret, are you sure about this? If we're wrong, we're not wrong, Margaret said firmly. I've served the royal family for 37 years, and I know when something is rotten at its core. Queen Victoria died protecting the truth, and I'll be damned if I let her murderers inherit the crown she died defending. That evening, as Margaret prepared for what could be her final act of service to the crown, she thought about Queen Victoria's letter to her son. The Queen had been right about one thing: the truth would destroy King James. Learning that his wife was a foreign spy and that his most trusted advisor was a murderer would shatter everything he believed about his life and his family. But Margaret also knew that the truth, no matter how painful, was better than living a lie. And if Elena and Blackwood succeeded in their plan, the damage to the monarchy and to Britain itself would be irreparable. As midnight approached, Margaret Harris prepared to risk everything for the truth that Queen Victoria had died protecting. Tomorrow, one way or another, the conspiracy that had corrupted the very heart of the British crown would finally be exposed. At precisely midnight, Margaret Harris stood in the shadows outside Ashford Palace, wearing the black clothing she had chosen for what might be her final mission. The palace loomed before her like a fortress, its windows dark except for the security lights that swept the grounds in regular patterns. She had studied these patterns for 37 years, knew every blind spot, every timing interval, every weakness in the system she had helped design. Her phone vibrated with a text from Sarah. Fire alarm set to trigger in East Wing at 12:15 a.m. You'll have approximately 20 minutes before they realize it's false and redirect security. Good luck. Margaret checked her watch and began moving toward the servants' entrance she had used thousands of times before. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination. At 67, she was no longer the young security officer who had first walked these halls, but her knowledge of the palace's secrets remained unmatched. The servants' door opened easily with her emergency key. Apparently, Blackwood's security review hadn't been as thorough as he believed. Margaret slipped inside and moved through the familiar corridors, using service passages and hidden stairways that most of the current staff didn't even know existed. At 12:15 exactly, alarms began blaring in the East Wing. Margaret heard the immediate response: running footsteps, shouted orders, and the sound of security teams mobilizing. She waited in an alcove until the corridor was clear, then made her way toward the Queen's private quarters. The study was exactly as they had left it the night before. Margaret quickly located the hidden panel and opened the safe, her fingers working the combination with practiced ease. But as she reached for the documents, she heard something that made her blood freeze. Footsteps in the corridor outside, approaching the study. Impossible. All security should have been drawn to the false alarm in the East Wing. Margaret quickly grabbed as many documents as she could carry and stuffed them into her bag, but before she could close the safe, the study door opened. Princess Elena stood in the doorway, no longer beautiful in Margaret's eyes but cold and predatory like a hunting cat. "I thought I might find you here," Elena said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Margaret had never noticed before. "Did you really think that pathetic little fire alarm would fool us?" Behind Elena, Lord Blackwood emerged from the shadows, along with two men Margaret didn't recognize. Large, dangerous-looking men who were clearly not palace security. "Mrs. Harris," Blackwood said with mock politeness, "you've caused us quite a bit of trouble, breaking into the palace, stealing royal documents. These are very serious crimes." "The only criminals here are you and your Russian spy," Margaret replied, surprised by her own boldness. Elena's perfect mask finally slipped completely. "Careful, old woman. You know far less than you think you do." "I know you murdered Queen Victoria," Margaret said firmly. "I know you've been selling state secrets to foreign governments. And I know that your entire marriage to Prince James is a lie." Blackwood stepped forward, his thin face twisted with anger. "You know nothing. You're a senile old woman who's lost touch with reality." But Elena held up a hand to stop him. "Actually, she knows quite a lot, more than I expected." She studied Margaret with cold calculation. "The question is, who else have you told?" Margaret remained silent, but Elena's smile was like a blade. "Ah, the journalist. Miss Sarah Mitchell. We've been monitoring her communications, you know. Very interesting conversation you two had this afternoon about stopping the coronation." Margaret felt her heart sink. They had been listening to her phone calls. "Don't worry," Elena continued. "Miss Mitchell is being taken care of as we speak. A tragic car accident. Very sad. Apparently she was driving too fast on a rainy road." "You monsters," Margaret whispered. "We're patriots," Blackwood corrected. "Everything we've done has been for the greater good. The British monarchy is an outdated institution, a relic that serves no purpose in the modern world. We're simply helping it along to its natural conclusion. By betraying your own country?" Elena laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Book? Country? I serve no country, Mrs. Brooke, heiress. I serve progress. The old order is dying, and we're midwives to the new world that's being born." One of the unknown men stepped forward and whispered something in Blackwood's ear. The Lord Chancellor nodded grimly. "I'm afraid we have a problem," Blackwood announced. "It seems Miss Mitchell was not alone tonight. She had backup. Someone has been broadcasting a live stream of our conversation for the past 5 minutes. Elena's composure cracked for the first time. "What?" Margaret looked around frantically and spotted a small device hidden behind one of the Queen's picture frames. A tiny camera with a blinking red light. Sarah had been more clever than any of them had realized. "You see," came Sarah's voice from a hidden speaker, "I may be many things, but I'm not stupid. I've been broadcasting everything that's happened in that room tonight to multiple news outlets and social media platforms. By now, millions of people have heard Princess Elena confess to being a spy and Lord Blackwood admit to murdering the Queen." Elena's face contorted with rage. She grabbed the nearest heavy object, a crystal paperweight from the Queen's desk, and hurled it at the hidden camera. The device shattered, but the damage was already done. "You stupid little girl," Elena snarled into the air. "You have no idea what forces you're playing with." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," Sarah's voice replied from speakers throughout the room. She had planted multiple devices. International criminals who infiltrated the British royal family as part of a larger conspiracy to destabilize European governments. But here's what you don't know. While you've been focused on Margaret, I've been busy. The lights in the study suddenly went out, plunging the room into darkness. Margaret heard sounds of struggle, shouting, and confusion. Emergency lighting flickered on a moment later, revealing that the two unknown men had drawn guns. "Enough games," one of them said in a thick accent. "We eliminate all witnesses and proceed with the original plan." But before anyone could move, the study door burst open and armed police officers flooded in, their weapons trained on Blackwood, Elena, and their associates. Armed police, nobody move. Elena raised her hand slowly, but her eyes blazed with fury. "You think this changes anything? The coronation is in 6 hours. James will still be crowned, and I will still be queen." "Actually," came a familiar voice from the doorway, "I don't think so." King James stepped into the room, his face pale but determined. Behind him were more police officers and what appeared to be military intelligence personnel. Margaret had never been so relieved to see anyone in her life. "James," Elena said, her voice suddenly soft and pleading, "whatever they've told you, it's not true. These people are trying to destroy our family." But James looked at his wife with eyes full of pain and betrayal. "I heard everything, Elena. The live broadcast was sent directly to my private security team 20 minutes ago. I know who you really are. I know what you've done. You don't understand," Elena continued desperately. "I did love you. That part was real." "Was it?" James asked quietly. "Was any of it real? Our wedding, our conversations, the plans we made for our future? Was any of that actually you, or was it all just part of your mission?" Elena opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The silence stretched between them, and in that moment, Margaret saw the young king's heart break completely. "Your Majesty," one of the military intelligence officers said respectfully, "we need to take them into custody immediately. There may be other operatives within the palace." As Elena and Blackwood were led away in handcuffs, Elena turned back to James one last time. "You'll never be able to trust anyone again," she said coldly. "Every person who approaches you, every advisor who counsels you, every woman who claims to love you, you'll always wonder if they're real or if they're just another spy. I've destroyed more than just your marriage, James. I've destroyed your ability to trust." James said nothing, but Margaret could see the truth of Elena's words hitting him like physical blows. After the arrests were completed and the study was secured as a crime scene, Margaret found herself alone with the young king. He stood by the window, staring out at the palace grounds where his wedding to Elena had taken place 5 years earlier. "Your Majesty," Margaret said gently. "I'm so sorry. I know how much she meant to you." James was quiet for a long moment. "Did my mother suffer?" he asked finally. "When they killed her, was she in pain?" Margaret considered lying to spare him, but decided he deserved the truth. The poison they used was designed to mimic heart failure. Based on the medical report she commissioned, it would have been difficult, but she faced it bravely, knowing she was protecting you and the crown. "She knew," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She knew Elena was a spy, and she died trying to protect me from the truth." "She died trying to protect the monarchy," Margaret corrected gently. "And through her sacrifice, she succeeded. The evidence she gathered will help authorities identify other compromised individuals and prevent this from happening again." James turned from the window, and Margaret was struck by how much older he looked than his 45 years. "Margaret, I owe you an enormous debt. If you hadn't refused to give Elena access to the safe, if you hadn't worked with Miss Mitchell to expose the truth, I was just doing my duty, Your Majesty. The same duty I've performed for 37 years. "No," James said firmly. "This was far beyond duty. This was courage. And because of your courage, the crown survives." Margaret felt tears threatening for the first time since the ordeal began. "What happens now, Your Majesty?" "The coronation will proceed as scheduled," James said with quiet determination. "But it will be different than originally planned. Instead of a celebration, it will be a recommitment to the values my mother died protecting. Transparency, integrity, and unwavering service to the British people." As dawn began to break over Ashford Palace, Margaret realized that Queen Victoria's faith in the monarchy had been vindicated. The crown would survive, but it would be forever changed by the night when a loyal servant refused to unlock a safe, and a brave journalist risked everything to expose the truth. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Margaret Harris stood in the same study where she had first refused Princess Elena access to Queen Victoria's safe. But everything was different now. The room had been redecorated, the walls bearing new portraits, and the furniture arranged to create a more open, welcoming atmosphere. Most importantly, the hidden safe had been removed entirely, its contents now preserved in the official royal archives where they belonged. King James had insisted on transparency in all things following the revelations about Elena and Blackwood. The investigation that followed their arrest had uncovered an international conspiracy that stretched across 8 countries, involving 17 compromised officials and 3 other royal marriages that were discovered to be elaborate intelligence operations. Margaret, now officially retired but serving as a special advisor to the king on security matters, was reviewing the final report when Sarah Mitchell arrived for their monthly meeting. The journalist had become something of a celebrity, following her role in exposing the conspiracy, but she had used her newfound fame responsibly, continuing to investigate corruption wherever she found it. "How is he?" Sarah asked, settling into the chair across from Margaret's desk. Margaret knew she was asking about King James. The young monarch had struggled significantly in the months following Elena's arrest. The psychological impact of discovering that his 5-year marriage had been built on lies and betrayal had taken its toll. He had thrown himself into his royal duties with almost obsessive dedication, as if trying to prove that he could be worthy of the crown his mother had died protecting. "Better?" Margaret replied honestly. "The grief counseling is helping, and he's beginning to trust again, though slowly," Doctor writes. "William says that's normal for someone who's experienced such profound betrayal. And the investigation? Any new developments?" Margaret opened a thick file that had arrived that morning from MI6. Elena's real name was Katerina Volkov. She was recruited by Russian intelligence when she was 16, trained for 8 years specifically to target European royalty. The operation was called Crown Jewel. Their goal was to place operatives in strategic marriages that would give them access to state secrets and the ability to influence policy from within. Sarah shook her head in amazement. 8 years of training just to seduce one man. The dedication is almost admirable if it weren't so evil. "The most disturbing part," Margaret continued, "is that she genuinely seemed to develop feelings for James as time went on. The psychologists who interviewed her believe she experienced genuine internal conflict between her mission and her emotions. Does that make it better or worse?" "Worse, I think," Margaret replied. It means she could have chosen to abandon her mission and confess the truth. Instead, she chose to continue the deception even when it meant allowing his mother to be murdered. The two women sat in contemplative silence for a moment. The scope of the conspiracy they had helped uncover still seemed almost impossible to believe. Elena's handlers had provided her with false documents, created a fictional background complete with fake family members, and even arranged for her to accidentally meet James at a charity event 5 years earlier.
"What about Blackwood?" Sarah asked. "He's been more forthcoming in his confession," Margaret replied.
Apparently, he was recruited gradually over several years. It started with small favors, providing Elena with information about James's schedule, access to certain documents. They slowly increased their hold over him through blackmail and financial incentives until he was completely compromised. And Queen Victoria's murder? Margaret's expression hardened. That was Elena's idea. When the Queen began investigating the financial irregularities, Elena realized they needed a more permanent solution. Blackwood obtained the poison through contacts in the Russian embassy. They administered it gradually over 3 weeks through her tea service. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. To think that we almost didn't discover the truth. If you hadn't refused to open that safe, the Queen knew we would, Margaret interrupted. She had faith that the right people would ask the right questions when the time came. She prepared for this scenario, leaving us the evidence we needed and trusting that someone would have the courage to act on it. There was a knock at the study door, and King James entered. He looked healthier than he had in months, though there were new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before his ordeal. He had lost weight, and his hair showed more gray, but there was a strength in his bearing that hadn't been present during his marriage to Elena. "Margaret, Miss Mitchell," he said warmly. "I hope I'm not interrupting."
"Not at all, Your Majesty,"
Sarah replied, rising to curtsy. Even after 6 months, she still felt slightly overwhelmed in his presence. James waved her back to her seat. "Please, after everything we've been through together, I think we can dispense with some of the formality." He settled into a third chair, completing their small circle. "I actually came to share some news with both of you." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Good news, I hope?" "Very good," James confirmed. "The investigation has led to the identification and arrest of Elena's entire network. 7 other operatives have been captured across Europe, and 3 planned marriages to minor royalty have been prevented. MI6 believes we've successfully dismantled the entire Crown Jewel operation." Sarah leaned forward eagerly. "That's wonderful news. What about Elena herself?" James's expression became more serious. "She's agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony has been invaluable in identifying other threats to European security. How do you feel about that?" Margaret asked gently. She knew that James still struggled with conflicted emotions about his former wife. "Relieved mostly," James admitted. "I think part of me needed to know that some portion of what we shared was real, that she wasn't completely without conscience. Her cooperation suggests that she does feel some remorse for what she did." "And Blackwood will spend the rest of his life in prison," James said firmly. "There can be no leniency for someone who betrayed their oath of service so completely." The 3 sat quietly for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts about the strange journey that had brought them together. Finally, James spoke again. "I've been thinking a great deal about trust lately," he said. "Elena's final words to me were that she had destroyed my ability to trust others. For months, I believed she might be right. Every conversation, every interaction felt tainted by suspicion and doubt." "That's a normal response to betrayal," Sarah offered. "Perhaps," James acknowledged. "But I realized something important. The conspiracy succeeded not because people can't be trusted, but because I had trusted the wrong people for the wrong reasons. I trusted Elena because she was beautiful and charming and told me what I wanted to hear. I trusted Blackwood because he had held his position for years and seemed confident in his authority." Margaret nodded, understanding. "But you should have been trusting people like your mother who tried to warn you, and your security staff who were trained to protect you." "Exactly. I was trusting based on emotion and convenience rather than character and demonstrated loyalty.
The irony is that the people who saved me, both of you, were people I barely knew but who proved their trustworthiness through their actions." Sarah smiled slightly. "Your mother knew we could be trusted. She left us the tools we needed and trusted us to use them correctly. Which brings me to why I wanted to speak with both of you today," James continued. "I'm implementing significant changes to how the royal household operates. Margaret, I'd like you to become the new chief security advisor, with full authority to implement whatever protocols you deem necessary to prevent future infiltration." Margaret was speechless for a moment. At 67, she had expected to fade into quiet retirement, not to be offered one of the highest positions in the royal security apparatus. "Your Majesty, I'm honored, but you're the only person I trust completely to protect this institution," James interrupted. "You proved your loyalty when it mattered most, even at great personal risk. There's no one better qualified for this position. And Miss Mitchell," James continued, turning to Sarah, "I'd like to offer you the position of official royal correspondent. Your job would be to investigate and report on royal activities with complete independence, serving as a check against future corruption or misconduct." Sarah's eyes widened. "You want me to spy on you?" "I want you to ensure that the monarchy remains accountable to the people it serves," James clarified. "You would have access to all non-classified information and the authority to publish whatever you discover. Think of it as institutionalized transparency." Both women were quiet as they absorbed the magnitude of what James was proposing. He was essentially asking them to help him rebuild the monarchy from the ground up, with transparency and accountability as its founding principles. "It's an unprecedented arrangement," Margaret said slowly. "These are unprecedented times," James replied. "The old way of doing things, the secrecy, the blind trust in tradition, nearly destroyed us. If the monarchy is to survive in the modern world, it must be willing to evolve." Sarah was the first to respond. "I accept your offer, Your Majesty, but I have one condition." "Name it." "If I ever discover evidence of corruption or misconduct, I publish it regardless of the consequences to individual reputations or to the institution itself. No exceptions, no special considerations." James smiled for the first time in months. "I wouldn't want it any other way." "Margaret?" Margaret looked around the study that had been the site of so much drama and tragedy. She thought of Queen Victoria, who had trusted her with the monarchy's deepest secrets. She thought of the evidence hidden in that safe and the courage it had taken to reveal it. Most of all, she thought of her 37 years of service and the oath she had taken to protect the crown. "I accept," she said finally, "but I also have a condition, which is no more hidden safes. No more secret compartments. If something is important enough to preserve, it belongs in the official archives where future generations can learn from it." "Agreed," James said immediately. As the three of them finalized the details of their new partnership, Margaret felt a sense of completion that had been missing since Queen Victoria's death. The conspiracy that had threatened to destroy the monarchy had been exposed and defeated. More importantly, they had used the crisis as an opportunity to build something stronger and more transparent. 6 months later, at the first anniversary memorial service for Queen Victoria, King James spoke about the lessons learned from the conspiracy that had threatened the crown. Margaret and Sarah sat in the front row, no longer outsiders looking in, but integral parts of the institution they had helped save. In his speech, James honored his mother's memory by announcing the establishment of the Victoria Foundation for Democratic Transparency, an international organization dedicated to exposing corruption in government institutions worldwide. The foundation would be funded by the recovery of assets stolen by Blackwood and his associates, ensuring that their crimes would ultimately serve to strengthen democracy rather than undermine it. As the service concluded and the congregation filed out, Margaret remained in her seat for a moment, thinking about the path that had brought her to this point. A simple refusal to open a safe had set in motion events that changed the course of history. Queen Victoria's faith in her people had been vindicated, and the crown she died protecting was stronger than ever. Outside, the British flag flew at full height above Ashford Palace, no longer a symbol of hidden corruption, but of transparent service to the people. Margaret Harris, once a simple security guard, now walked these halls as the guardian of a new kind of monarchy, one built on truth rather than tradition, on accountability rather than authority. The safe was gone, its secrets revealed. But the crown endured, stronger for having been tested and purified by fire.
And in the end, that was exactly what Queen Victoria had died hoping to achieve.